Without AI, you cannot be competitive in tomorrow's workforce. It is like going into a sport where you have got to be best in class in the sport and not showing up with the right skates, the right skis, whatever it is.
Every big private public sector company, they've invested billions over the last decades in their existing technology stack. And in a lot of ways, it's holding them back because they haven't invested over the years to make it ready to be AI enabled or to be a part of a cloud.
There is a drastic need for copper. Prices are up, and copper is kind of the basic conductor in so many of the electronics that we all use every single day. So we are pulling that out and we are reselling it. Last year alone, you could say it adds up to about 5 Eiffel Towers.
That's a powerful visual.
That's actually an amazing visual.
AT&T is in the middle of something every enterprise will recognize. How do we modernize the business? Why we continue to serve our customers in our market and our people and our operations, and do it at a scale that includes everything that they touch. So we're going to dig into that today and more.
Today, we're talking about what it actually means to cloudify a network, where AI is truly helping, and what transformations look like when it touches customers, employees, and operations all at once.
I'm Bill Briggs, Deloitte's Chief Technology Officer.
And I'm Simona Spelman, Deloitte's Chief Human Officer. This is Forward Technology, and our mission is to close the gap between technology headlines and enterprise reality, so leaders can turn what's possible into what actually works.
And to do just that, we're joined by Susan Johnson here in our greenhouse at Deloitte University, who is the Senior Executive Vice President of Transformation and Supply Chain for AT&T. Susan manages a portfolio of broad transformation across the core of AT&T's business, including their network, billing, customer service, and beyond.
So Bill, before we get into the story from the inside, we want to ground this in a few data points. Not trivia, just the signals that explain why so many companies are making these moves right now.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay.
Some research roundup.
All right, I'm going to start with this data point, but I'm going to need my glasses for this.
Okay,
There's a lot of numbers here. So 71% of surveyed organizations are currently modernizing core infrastructure to support AI implementation.
You know this is near and dear to my heart.
Yes, we know why.
Sadly, let's define core modernization for a minute. So every big private public sector company, they've invested billions over the last decades in their existing technology stack. And in a lot of ways, it's holding them back because they haven't invested over the years to make it ready to be AI enabled or to be a part of a cloud. So the fact that, what was the number, 71%?
71%.
Yeah, I think it's because people don't always have it clearly labeled as such. Like, I would say it's closer to 100% because so much of core technology spend is on the existing, and then how do we make it be part of the answer for tomorrow? But the issue is a lot of times it's the CIO or the CTO they're carrying that cross, and it's a business issue, it's a strategic issue, but it gets relegated to, well, why have you guys not had your act together? And
right. You said that you're surprised with a 71%. You think it'd be closer to 100%.
I think it is closer to 100%.
And it's just mislabeled, or they're just not talking about it in the right.
It's just not a line item on the budget in some cases. But I think there's another stat in there about
that 23% are investing 6 to 10% of annual revenue in modernizing core enterprise systems.
I mean, a typical in your clients, what's the spend on tech? 2 to 3%.
2 to 3%.
In industries that typically invest a lot in tech. So the fact that 6 to 10% is being spent on the core, that tells you how big of an issue this is, especially as people move into, we want to agentify our business.
Yep.
AI supercharge our core operations. Turns out you can't go very far if you don't have the infrastructure to run on at scale, if you don't have the systems ready to participate in an agentic workload. And that doesn't just happen by accident.
And I would guess that 6 to 10% in annual revenue spend is probably heavily weighted on the tech spend.
1,000%.
How much do you think is spent on the workforce or on the human side of it?
Not enough. And that's not pandering to you. And I think that's the other piece. And in our Tech Trends report in 2026, we talk about the great rebuild of the IT organization. That's a part of it.
Yep.
But the biggest piece is most core systems are the heart of business.
Yep.
That's where claims are being adjudicated. That's where you see mission decisions being made in defense agencies. That's where you see the actual work going on in manufacturing. And so that's the whole, how do we redesign work from the beginning? And the people is a huge piece of it, but it's like the last thing we think about.
Last thing we think about, because with every tech transformation, I would say is a massive work redesign project, and we just don't talk about it in that lens.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how Susan brings this to life.
Totally. And like one piece of this, if you don't start from how do we simplify, because the other thing is these core systems were put in place decades ago where we were just trying to get human-based, maybe paper-based process and digitize it and maybe make it automate a little bit. But we still see so much of that core almost embalming the legacy way of thinking about how business should operate. And if we just layer tech on that, even the most sexy modern tech, the ceiling is so low. And we've got to find a way to get our people involved in that transformation journey because they're the ones that know where the opportunity lies.
And again, it's all around getting that right mix, right? That human times machine mix that's going to multiply the efficiency gains of any of these transformations.
Yeah. Welcome to The Big Idea. This is the segment where we move beyond the headlines and talk about how tech and innovation is actually playing out inside the enterprise. Make it very, very real, but also have some fun doing it. So we're thrilled to be joined today by Susan Johnson. She is the leader of transformation supply chain at AT&T, and we're coming at you live from Dallas, Texas, not far from HQ. Susan, it's so great to have you here. And your remit is a collection of transformation initiatives, but building on top of a 150-year-old, very successful
You've got it,
enterprise.
150 years.
Yeah, I mean, impressive. I've been a customer for a long time.
Thank
so
you
it's
for that.
Fantastic. But the transformation
I knew I liked you, by the way.
of the core business while you're still running the business, would love to hear, when people hear transformation office, they probably think of just one initiative, which at the scale of AT&T would be enough, but you've got a much bigger portfolio than that. So maybe just set the stage of your reality.
Yeah, great question, and thank you for having me. So transformation, such a big word, maybe an overused word. Maybe I'll just set a little bit about where we've been on the last 5-year journey, because I'll give a call out to what we've been doing on a broader transformation, which is first, how do you get to the right set of assets? Big, bold bets. How do we set up the right asset portfolio? That has been the journey that we have been on for the last several years. And now we are really leveling up about how we transform our infrastructure within AT&T. You and I talked earlier about AI.
Yeah.
AI to really future enable so much of the infrastructure. You've got to transform your internal IT as well as the network. How do you make it cloudified? How do you make it ready to bring that AI full capability? AT&T, 150 years. We did not grow up. It's a digitally native company. And so really big transformation going on to level up the network capabilities and to level up how many of the tools that we interface with our customers are working.
I've got to jump in.
Okay.
So what about the workforce? You're talking about the assets, you're talking about, all these things, but are you having a transformation journey as it relates to the workforce in all of this?
From a cultural standpoint, but more importantly about how do you work to make sure that the workforce is aligning on where you want to go and the transformation that needs to happen. We'll go deeper on this, but I fundamentally believe that you need everybody that is touching these transformation projects, which is the vast majority of AT&T employees, understanding the why. So I spent a lot of time on the why. If you don't understand the why, I'm just trying to push. We really want the employees to own that with us and understand how we are going about this journey of transformation.
And you ended when you just described a portfolio, the why from a customer back lens on quality of, let's face it, it's the infrastructure that's running everything we talk in this podcast about. We talk about infrastructure loosely, but connectivity is a huge piece. And then the cloud enablement and the AI enablement on top of that. And so you've got the core capability from end customer, the core capability for enterprises, building the future around the globe, by the way. I mean, it's a massive footprint. And then making that clear enough to be able to get the confidence for investment, which is significant, but also to be able to make it clear for your people and your customers to be able to go along on that journey. It's an amazingly complex bit of calculus.
Keeps it interesting, keeps it fun.
Yeah.
We always try to ground on the customer. We really are it's all about the customer, beginning and end. And so focusing on the customer's needs, grounding on the customer's needs, really identifying how we can improve those interfaces to the customer, the products we deliver to the customer is the starting point. And then it is about how we are working backwards then to define what success looks like, defining the why, and really laying that out to bring employees along, which is just so absolutely critical.
So it's interesting, you talked about being on this journey for 5 years, just in the pace of change and everything that's happening. If you were to write the headline 5 years ago, how much would it have changed from where you are today?
How much would it have changed? I absolutely think that we've been on a very dynamic journey. And one of the things that's so fascinating about the time that we sit right now in businesses, things are changing, I believe, faster than ever.
Yeah.
Which means that some of the forecasts you would have made 5 years ago are probably turned out to not be true. And the evolution and the path of which AI is enabling us to bring new services to market and to improve how we are interfacing with our customers, I think means we need to move faster than ever. So back to the transformation that we are on. How do we think about setting those big, hairy, audacious goals? I'm a big believer in those. How do you get the organization aligned on what those goals are for the transformational initiatives? And it's a fascinating conversation because I find that sometimes when you work with a technology team and then you work with a business team, sometimes we have different goals. And if you don't have those deep conversations, I'll give you an example. You'll have a technology team. Technology team, I want to set up the old, I want to set up the new. I want to set up the new and I want to make sure that it's an improved experience for all of our customer service reps. And so having those dynamic conversations and getting people aligned makes this really very much of a collaborative, interdisciplinary journey together that is critical.
And as a technologist in the room, I guess, the temptation can be over-indexing on milestones and what could end up being artificial markers of progress because the bill of materials of all the things required to get there are so nasty and complex. But then you lose sight of the why, which is always a danger. So I'm not apologizing as much as this is like a therapy session saying, we've lived this before. All right, I wanted the tech and maybe just to spin the propeller and geek out a bit. I love the wireline transformation initiative because I don't know if people realize how much legacy copper in the network still exists. And I think I read, and I think you shared before, $6 billion in operating on that legacy network that at one point was 100% of the customer base. And now is it 2%?
Yep,
or so?
You got it right. Okay. You've done your homework.
Look at that score on so maybe walk through why that matters so much for the future of AT&T and for your customers. And I'm not sure that's something that's very obvious maybe to the layperson.
Great question, Bill. I'll start out, as I said earlier, grounding on the customer. Yeah. First of all, we have customers that are still sitting on a 6 megabit service. Many of you probably don't even know what that looks like. The old copper-based technology, 70-year-old type technology. And unlike a lot of the transformation and technology upgrades that we all sit in the middle of, and I have seen many versions of as a head of supply chain, we've been unable to really manage that upgrade process for our customers because of the regulatory envelope that sits around it. So we have 500,000 square miles of territory where we still have these large infrastructure central office wire centers that are really kind of the post office that delivers it all, the copper wires that sit on top of the telephone poles, delivering services that 98% of our customers have already voted by moving off of. And if you can think of the energy consumption of that, if you can think of the workforce requirements to maintain it, if you can think about how inefficient that is, and back to the customer lens, it's not making the customer leave. customer needs.
Yeah.
Our net promoter score, something I'm sure you guys are familiar with, are very, very low, and in some cases very negative for the copper-based services. So we've got to upgrade the technology, educate our customers about what else is available out there, and that sounds easy, but I do in some cases have customers hanging on to a plain old telephone service line because they believe they're going to lose their phone number if they transition. So we've had to educate on that, or they're going to lose their email address.
Oh, that's okay. Okay.
if they get off of DSL.
But that's real. That's their identity. So yeah.
Everyone will maintain their voice connectivity, access to 911 services, keep your phone number. All of this has been part of the customer education process.
We talk a lot about, we were talking before, how elevating core modernization is a very strategic part of any, and when I come in to talk about technology trends, people expect the shiny objects of agentic and physical AI. That's important, but the building blocks are the core. In this case, it's your core legacy business. So you have the customer dynamic and your other carriers. There's some relationships you have to maintain, and there's wire networks as well. I've heard. And then you mentioned the regulatory. So not only is it, hey, we made the right investments over time to modernize and migrate, but in some cases your hands were tied because of Fed and state regulations. Like for everyone that thinks that their world is very complicated, I think maybe this is their own therapy session to say, oh my goodness, thank you. Goodness, I'm not Susan. Because that sounds even more nasty than what do I do with my legacy ERP or my claim systems that were built in an aging development language. But like all of that has been your remit to navigate. Yeah, I mean, that's...
Yeah, I think we talked about why we need to get off of the copper. I want to make sure I stay focused on that. It's not meeting the needs of our customers. And it is incredibly inefficient, both from an energy usage standpoint, from an efficiency of how the workforce is managed. So just very inefficient. So a good opportunity for us to take cost out and better meet our customers. And frankly, when you're doing those two things, you're on the right path. But then we had to step back and say, okay, we know that we've got to do this. How do we go about this? And so we spent a lot of time working through making sure we understood all the regulatory factors so that we can work with the regulators. And I won't go into that because that's a whole nother dissertation. But I think we've done a lot of good work with state and federal agencies where we've got the capabilities now to move forward. And so the biggest challenges for us right now, I would say, are a couple things. First of all, it's not just about AT&T moving off this old technology. It is not IP-based, so a lot of the intelligence that sits in that internet protocol standard does not exist in some of the old legacy stuff. So we need to move the entire industry along on it. A lot of how the carriers send phone calls from us to one of our competitors, another carrier, is all set up in that old TDM format that goes through a lot of this infrastructure. We've got to bring the entire industry along, which is a challenge. And then very much about working with our large enterprise customers is another issue. And so back to the how do you bring the teams along, I've had to sit down with some of our enterprise sales teams who are really capable people that are out looking for making sure they're making the best decisions for their customers, explain to them why we've got to make this movement, and also explain to them about the technology that's better that we're moving our customers to, which is part of the fun of keeping this interesting.
So talk about ecosystem orchestration at its best. That's pretty amazing. So people might be wondering, you're talking about copper. What's going to happen with all the copper that you have right now? Where's that going?
It's a great question, Simona. Thank you for that. There is a drastic need for copper. Prices are up, and copper is kind of the basic conductor in so many of the electronics that we all use every single day. So we are pulling that out, and we are reselling it. And in fact, I think last year alone, you could say it adds up to about 5 Eiffel Towers, if I get that fact right. So it's a lot of copper.
That's a powerful visual.
That's actually an amazing visual.
It is. So a lot of copper getting pulled out and a lot of opportunity back to also the energy dynamic going on with all of the AI data centers getting built. Opportunity for us to turn down the energy in these wire centers and free that up for better use for some of the AI capabilities that we're all looking for.
Love that.
I have to ask this question because I'm sitting here going, Oh my goodness, like with everything you say, there's like, my mind is, what is your leadership style? And how, like, what is the one thing you go to, when you're like, how am I going to get through the day? Because I imagine every single one of your days is, I'm not even sure you know what direction it's going to go in, but what's your leadership style through all of this?
It's a really effective question, so let me answer. I think one of the tactics and leadership things that I use often is trying to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction for the goal. So much of what I do right now is interdisciplinary. I have teams that I need to motivate to move forward, and they don't report to me. Mm-hmm. I find that to be the best motivational challenge. How do I align our objectives so we both understand where we're going? I talked about what I believe is the importance of a big, hairy, audacious goal, setting that, talking a little bit about why we're getting there through the lens of the customer, the sales team, the engineering team. How do I think about the benefits to the organization that I'm interfacing with? And then how do we start identifying the path to get there, which is just so important. Or more importantly, I like to say, write the press release for where we're going.
I love that.
What does it look like when we all get there and we can say we are the connectivity leader with AI-enabled infrastructure that is differentiating us with our competitors? That kind of brings tears to my eyes. In most cases, when I'm interfacing with the teams, it's an area that kind of gets them excited. Okay, then what does that take?
And then the shared true north to say every decision we're making, does it add up to that objective? So you said interdisciplinary. I think cross-functional is one of those words. You said earlier on transformation, maybe one of the more overused words, aspirational in a lot of cases. I meet with a lot of clients. I think you and your team have made this interdisciplinary, cross-functional real in ways I haven't seen it before. Maybe rattle through some of what that actually looks like, the teams and the disciplines, the functions that you've had to bring together, some under your direct control, and as you said, with some influence in getting the oars to be rowing. Like, maybe double click on that, make it real.
But you and I mentioned earlier, first of all, there's a lot of technical depth. I have absolute experts, whether it's the teams that are doing the coding to lead some of our IT transformations. They are absolute rock stars and they know where they're headed. And then in many cases, you've got the business team that is defining the requirements of that. How you work them together at the same time that we are orchestrating that the platform they sit on, the network that interfaces it all, is also in a transformation, means that we have all got to work together and communicate and figure out how to finish each other's sentences. So it starts with a BHAG, but it also gets down into a pretty detailed plan about, okay, what does that look like? What are the time frame and what are the objectives that we're all aligned on?
I love your modesty, and you also own billing and service and customer support, like the pieces of those that have to come together.
They do.
It's astounding, and it's a testament to be able to say the progress that's being made in the volatility that's around us. So it's.
What's the pulse of the workforce right now in terms of AI? What are those enduring skills that people will need beyond the technology? I think you mentioned it. You talked about communication, listening, all of those things. Like what's the pulse right now, and what advice would you give?
We both hit college sophomores, so this is what we'll take notes on, pass along.
AI can make you much more effective at your job. We all know that you leave and go home every day without having finished everything you'd like to do in a day. So how do we put more tools in front of you, the employee? How do we make you more effective? How do we take you out of the administrative roles that you were sitting in the middle of to truly let AI make you more capable and drive more functionality for you, the employee, which is just so important. It is like going into a sport where you have got to be best in class in the sport and not showing up with the right skates, the right skis, whatever it is. Without AI, you cannot be competitive in tomorrow's workforce. And so it is about making you better, and it is about enabling your capabilities. I think the messaging is really important for us across all the workforce to make sure that the employees understand the benefits, but also that we're bringing them along in the training. And how do you get them more engaged? So one of the things we've been doing is kind of lunch and learn sessions. Have employees come and say, hey, here's how I've been using AI to make me better at my job. here's how I'm bringing AI and look what it's done for me in terms of an additional capability. Get more real, less threatening to the employee. I think that's important.
It's so huge. We did a study and it was trust based on org chart in a way. In the C-suite, I think it was your team that did this actually. I can't, the AI trust study.
Yeah, well, it's all about, creating that culture of trust. And it sounds like that's what you're doing, because people have to be comfortable, right? That if they share with you how many hours they're freeing up, that there's going to be a reward at the end of that, right? And it's all around using AI to scale that human edge.
I mean, it gets back to, in my view, it gets back to the conversation about the tech team wanting to say, we're moving to the new. The business team saying, great, but it needs to meet all of my customer requirements. At the same time, the market's moving.
Right.
And they're saying, okay, I need a new plan out.
Yeah.
That is a dynamic, I think, that gets through.
And
how do you measure success? By the way, we're spending a lot of time on how do you measure success. Given.
And what does success mean to the business side? What does it mean to
how do you get aligned
side?
on that? I think that alignment is critical.
Susan, this is exactly the kind of conversation we want this show to be known for. So I love. Do we hit? I think we hit everything. Oh wait, you got something.
I have one more, and it's in the back of my
Bring it
mind
on.
here. Because you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you talked about the dynamic between the business and the technology team and the tech team. Can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of the synergies or the tensions that might exist there, and how you're dealing with that?
Yeah, I one team, one dream. How do we get to one team, one dream here, right? And the technology team, absolute experts in saying we're moving to the new. The business team trying to keep very much their eyes on the market and what's changing in the market and what they need for their customers. And I think it comes down to that critical alignment. So one of the conversations we are spending a lot of time on is, what is the definition of success? By 2030, are we all aligned on what the definition of success is? Is it getting off the old technology, or is it enabling the new technology? And sometimes there are different paces. And then how do you align people on the goals that are tied to that definition of success? It sounds easy, but it actually ends up to be a very dynamic conversation. Very dynamic conversation.
It doesn't sound easy, and it's not easy. Susan, this is exactly the type of conversation we want to be having here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your insight, and thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Nice to spend some time with you both. Appreciate it.
This was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
If today's conversation sparked something for you, connect with us on LinkedIn. Search for Bill Briggs, Brett Davis, and Simona Spelman at Deloitte, and tell us what you are modernizing right now. We share research, perspectives, and examples of what works inside real enterprises. And if you found this episode useful, send it to one leader on your team who is in the middle of a transformation.
Okay, before we finish, let's end like we always do, a zoom out in the headlines. Something that we thought was a nice hook into this episode. I like this one. It's focused on all of the capital spend being budgeted in 2026, $650 billion in data center and infrastructure build out, which you see a lot of headlines around. It just shows how much. I think there's a couple things to it. One, that's more than we've seen any individual company invest over the last decade, and it's all happening at once.
At the same time.
Yeah, I mean,
at some point, we don't have infinite amount of energy here, right, to support all of this.
Even with 5 Eiffel Towers of copper that we can add to the mix.
So I thought that was absolutely fascinating, and I love that Susan is thinking about what she's going to do. She's going to get rid of this copper. She's going to create more energy. She's going to free up energy. But it's staggering to me to think about all of this happening at once. It's scary.
Yeah, and that's just the big hyperscalers and AI companies investing. The thing we hear every day is, okay, I'm an enterprise leader now in pick your industry. What should I be doing? And it's this interesting tension between, I love the fact that I can take advantage of cloud-based AI and capabilities, quick, scalable, elastic, and good news, bad news. I find something that scales and suddenly the meter's running and the cost might be a runaway. And we saw that in cloud, but it's exponentially higher potentially in this new world.
Well, think about it. We're not even sure what the cost is and even how you're wording prompts, right? Think about the costs of that. Like, and maybe talk a little bit about the CPU versus GPU. You want to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
in this trade-off of, as you say, especially as we move to, the promise of agents is amazing because they're going to be more self-directive, but they also can go into loops where they're invoking services that you may be paying for by the drink because that's the way you contract. Again, because you want to go fast. Suddenly, and we went through this with cloud, where all of a sudden this idea of moving to OpEx over CapEx seemed like a grand thing until your OpEx is multiples more expensive than your CapEx ever was. Just like it was never the answer, mainframe bad, cloud good, it's not the answer of everyone should go and invest in dedicated data centers full of AI chips, but you certainly shouldn't leave that to chance. So it's a bit of how do you make the right decision?
Well, how, exactly. Like, what's the governance around it? This kind of goes back. You're spending all of this money, but are you spending money on governance, decision rights? Who is making the decision on how you're using AI? How are you? By the way, I was just reading something interesting around how people are now using AI tools, just like we were using search.
Sure.
Yeah.
Early days.
Early days, right?
Yeah.
And so you're using all of this energy for things that you don't really need to be using it for. So it's just interesting to me because there's a whole conversation that we're not having around the governance around this and where the decision rights lie and how you're going to implement this in your company.
I don't have the stat, but pick your home personal assistant device and how much it costs just to say thank you after
And please.
after you've gotten the weather report.
But people don't know that.
Yeah.
Right? And you start to learn this because we're getting the bill.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. As an enterprise leader, we get the bill in terms of what that looks like and how we're using it.
So I think the net of it is, for a long time, we thought of hardware as a commodity, especially in this last 10 years of cloud. Especially CEO stuff, think about it, is absolutely strategic concern again. And so how do we make this front and center? And how do we architect technically, but also contractually? Because the right answer for a workload at the beginning might not be the right answer over time.
Yep.
So how do we make that a part of the governance and the response? It's exciting.
And scary.
Yeah, both. Thanks for spending time with us. If you're in the middle of a modernization or a transformation effort, remember the headline is the easy part. The hard part is how do we get the operating model, how do we get the operations, and most importantly, how do we get the customer or the citizen to be the hero of the story so they can actually feel it? Because it's all about the why and the so what, and we can figure out the how. Don't bet on the future, build it. Until next time. This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, go to deloitte.com/about. This publication contains general information only, and Deloitte is not, by means of this publication, rendering accounting, business, financial, investment, legal, tax, or other professional advice or services. This publication is not a substitute for such professional advice or services, nor should it be used as a basis for any decision or action that may affect your business. Before making any decisions or actions that may affect your business, you should consult a qualified professional advisor. Deloitte should not be responsible for any loss sustained by any person who relies on this publication.